With the final episode of Creature Commandos now out, we've gotten our first real glimpse into the new cinematic DCU under James Gunn. Though we don't know a lot about the characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, we do get enough of a glimpse of this universe to start to get a sense of what things will look like going forwards when it comes to how characters and lore are going to be adapted from the comic book source material. The previous DCEU made a lot of missteps at adapting the characters that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And Gunn's own previous films in there and over at the MCU have a habit of just creating an original character and tossing a comic name on him. Will this new DCU go that same direction, or will this new starting point be an opportunity to build a DC universe more like the source material? Well, let's find out by using my world-famous 3C system to rank every DC Comics character who's been adapted into this first DCU project, Creature Commandos, by how well or poorly they've been adapted. Those 3 C's, of course, being costume, character, and continuity. Costume ranks a character's costume or outfit, their overall look, and their superficial characteristics. Character rates their personality, their relationship with others, and their powers or abilities. And continuity rates their origin story, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. Now, I won't be including characters we see in the apocalyptic future, since it's just a vision and we don't learn enough about them to judge their accuracy. So that means no dead Wonder Woman or Gorilla Grodd. I'm also not including Batman. We do see a flashback of him for a second, but we know so little about this version, we just fill in the blanks with what we assume about him, and he'd unfairly rank well near the top of this list. And as I've said in previous videos, a character's ranking on this list has nothing to do with whether they're a good character or not, only how well they've been adapted in relation to other characters. So let's start counting up from the bottom worst adapted character to the number 1 best adapted character within this series to see if this is going to be a universe that takes the source material at least halfway seriously, or if it's one that'll just be making crap up and slapping a name on top of it. Let's start with the character at the absolute bottom of this list, and number 30, Bogman. Bogman is a very small character from the 2000s Creature Commando series, but he wasn't even on the main cast. Then appeared years later during a Justice League time travel plot in a version of the original World War II Creature Commandos. That's about it. In the show, he's a member of Easy Company, referenced by G.I. Robot. I'm not sure if this was a mistake, or if they're planning to actually have a World War II era Creature Commandos in the show later and are planting seeds for it. No, it's likely the former. Moving on. At 29, we have Isla McPherson. Not sure if this is just a naming coincidence or supposed to be the same character, but in the comics, Isla McPherson is a teacher at Gotham Academy. In the DCU, Isla McPherson is a college professor and an expert in Themysciran culture. Both teachers, otherwise nothing similar, and she gets killed. The end. At 28, we move up to Weasel. Comic Weasel was a college professor named John Monroe who dresses up in a weasel outfit and murders people, and later becomes a little more animalistic. Now, nothing so far says this isn't the movie Weasel's backstory, but I highly doubt it. This version of Weasel so far has no origin and is basically an animal in humanoid form. The only similarities are the name and being in Task Force X. As much as I do think a psychotic serial killer in a weasel costume would have been great, I doubt the character would have gone as far if they'd adapted him more accurately. Next up at 27, we have Kongorilla. When I was watching Creature Commandos and a big golden gorilla came out acting like any punk D-list villain, I was praying that there was some other obscure yellow gorilla I didn't know about and that this wasn't Kongorilla. In the show, he's some criminal inmate at Belle Reve who steals Mina's lunch, gets his ass kicked, and likely dies. In the comics, Congo Bill was an adventurer who loved the jungles of Africa. A dying friend gave him a magic ring that allows him to transfer minds with a mythical golden gorilla, and Bill uses that power to protect the jungles. Years later, his original body was destroyed and his mind is now permanently within the body of the golden gorilla. The character's been around since the friggin' 40s and was published for over 10 years straight before even gaining gorilla abilities. And in the modern day, he's even served on the damn Justice League. The flippant disregard for such an old character for a quick gag is a shame. This guy was created before the vast majority of us were even born. If they really wanted a gorilla villain for this scene, they could have chosen Manjir Mala, Ultrahumanite, Gargantua, Carmack, Killa, the gorilla boss of Gotham, Man-Ape, Primal, Silverback, Titano, Robo-Octoape, Mod Gorilla Boss, Lorix, or Xavier Simeon. And that's not even counting any gorillas from Gorilla City or Commandi's Future Earth. You want a gorilla villain in comics, there's a lot to choose from. There's no reason to tarnish poor Kongorilla like that. Moving up to 25, we've got Rick Flag Sr. Rick Flag does have a father also named Rick Flag in the comics. Instead of being a soldier from the modern day, comic Rick Flag was a fighter pilot who served in World War II and sacrificed his life to destroy a war wheel in the 50s. So he's not from the modern day, and he has no affiliation with the Creature Commandos and did not outlive his own son. And who knows, maybe there's a Rick Flag Sr. who fought in World War II. Next up, we're at number 25 with the Shaggy Man. Shaggy Man was one of the imprisoned villains when G.I. Robot was being led into his cell. Sure, it's just a cameo, but he's now a canon character within the lore of this new universe and actually tells us a lot about what we should be expecting for the world building of supervillainy and how they're going to be adapting minor characters as well. In the comics, Shaggy Man is a mindless synthetic creature accidentally created and brought to life using Plastaloy by Dr. Zagarian. It went on a rampage so destructive and powerful, not even the combined entirety of the Justice League could defeat it. He's an incredibly dangerous and uncontrollable creature. But here he's just chilling out in a cell casually. He is Shaggy, but he's a lot smaller than he's usually portrayed in comics, and he seems a lot more relaxed and kind of just like a normal guy. At 24, we have Bug-Eyed Bandit, another prisoner in Belle Reeve's non-human internment division. This Bug-Eyed Bandit actually looks like his comic version. He's even got his little facial hair. In the comics, he's a human scientist who developed robot insects to commit crimes. Him being here in the non-human section of the prison tells us that something about either his origin or powers are different in this universe, so he rates a lot lower on this list than he otherwise would. Moving up to 23, we're at Frankenstein, or Eric Frankenstein in this version. In modern DC Comics, Frankenstein's origin is similar to the book version, and since then he's been a stoic, badass, immortal warrior cleansing evil from the land. He's worked with the secret organization SHADE, and he's even led a version of the Creature Commandos. Well, in the show, he's not any of that. He's basically Pepe Le Pew. His entire existence is dedicated to chasing his beloved bride, and he is clearly very childless and mentally unstable. He's prone to freaking out and killing people for little to no reason. I love comic Frankenstein, so I'd love to go into an overly critical tirade criticizing how different this version is, but I can't. DC's had a long history, and there have been multiple versions of Frankenstein's monster across the decades, from the one Batman fought in the 40s to the spawn of Frankenstein in the 70s, and multiple other minor appearances here and there. This version is only from the 2000s, so to just say it's not accurate would be a bit hypocritical when I'm as pedantic as I am on this list. However, we all know they didn't go that deep into the lore, and this version is just the modern comic version's look, with a James Gunn version of the monster from the original book on the inside. Now we're at 22 with Hyena, another 2-second background prisoner, this time serving lunch. In the comics, she was bit while overseas in the Peace Corps and turned into a were-hyena. She seems to be permanently a hyena here, though, or maybe it is nighttime. At 21, we've got John Economos. In the comics, Economos is the warden at Belle Reve who Waller gets prisoners from. In the movie version, he instead works directly under Waller, doing whatever odd job she requires. Both versions wear glasses, have a beard, and are not in pristine shape. They have some similar elements to their personalities as well, but not a lot. At 20, we move up to Nosferatu. In the comics, Nosferatu is a vampire experiment created by Project Moreau, who tries to take power from other animal people created by the project within the island known as the Wildlands in the Pacific. In the show, she's another inmate at Belle Reve. We don't know much about her, but she looks pretty similar, and they make her a part of the Creature Commandos by the end of the show, even though she has no affiliation in the comics. At 19, we're at The Fisherman. The Fisherman was originally just a criminal with a fishing gimmick, but much later in comics, it was revealed that the hood he wears is likely an alien parasite controlling a human host. I've got to admit, I'm actually a little impressed at them including him in the non-human section of Belle Reve, since he's not an obvious monster villain most people would toss in. You'd actually have to at least read about the guy to know this deal. So we can assume then that the hood helmet thing is what's incarcerated, and the man it's on may be an innocent victim. Next up to 18 with Circe. Now, Circe is a bit of a difficult character to rank on here, because across her long time as a Wonder Woman villain, she's been portrayed in many different ways. Like many elements of Wonder Woman, every new writer who comes in thinks they know better and starts changing everything, so it can get a bit messy. Her overall look, outfit, and even hair color are a fine version of the many looks she's had in the comics. In the show, she's referred to as an Amazon of Themyscira, but she's actually an immortal sorceress who predates them by quite a lot. Her magics in the comics are usually far more powerful than the show, being that Wonder Woman faces her instead of a couple random villains. At 17, we have King Shark. We'd already seen King Shark previously in the DCEU, but his appearance and personality seem to be the same as in there. Both the comic and movie version are actually Hawaiian shark demigods named Nanu. In the comics, he has normal intelligence, while the movie version he is mentally stunted, to be polite. He's also much more muscular in the comics, but, to be fair, who isn't? At 16, we've got Nina Mazursky. Another difficult one to rank because she has two different origins from two different timelines within the same universe. In one, she was a monster girl from a village of monsters who was taken and raised by a scientist named Myron Mazursky. He told her she was a human who'd been scientifically transformed into an amphibian to save her from a lung-related birth defect. This version existed in World War II alongside an altered version of the original Creature Commandos. But when the changes that created that timeline were returned to normal, Nina now had a different origin and character, which makes no sense. Nina was now the scientist who'd created the Creature Commandos after the death of her daughter in the modern day. She then mutated herself as well to join their ranks. The show chose to go with the fake version that she was told by her father in the alternate timeline as the real origin in this show. Professor Mazursky was the scientist who made the original World War II Creature Commandos in the comics, so Nina was named after him in that alternate timeline to be his daughter, but then things changed in the modern day, so she took his role in the modern day, since in the original classic continuity had been wiped away due to, you know what, it's all too convoluted and annoying to go into here. They took the simplest origin, and she looks pretty much what she's supposed to look like, so let's move on. At 15, we're at Orca. Orca was a marine biologist who accidentally turned herself into an orca creature while experimenting to cure her paralysis with orca DNA. In the show, she's an orca creature incarcerated in the prison. Sounds good. Moving on. At 14, we've got Dr. Phosphorus. In the show, he's a scientist getting funding from Rupert Thorne, but is inspired by his wife's experiences living under a fascist regime to fudge the numbers when giving his research to Thorne to sell to foreign countries. Thorne gets pissed and kills his family before tossing him in his own machine to die. In the comics, though, he's a scientist who was asked to invest in and help run a power plant in Gotham City, but didn't know that the plant was made with substandard materials and was just part of a tax evasion scheme being set up by corrupt city councilman Rupert Thorne. When the core of the plant becomes unstable, he was exposed to massive amounts of radiation and mutated into a being made of phosphorus. Both versions then killed their way through Rupert's men for revenge, but the comic version was stopped by Batman, while the show version killed Rupert and his family. Both versions eventually turned to crime in Gotham, the show version taking over Thorne's criminal empire, while the comic version mostly hires himself out to whoever's paying, and tries to get revenge on Batman. And besides the lab coat, his look and even elements of his personality are right out of the comics. Now up to 13 with The Bride. Now, Frankenstein was adapted horribly, but The Bride has made her way far higher on this list. In the comics, she was also made as the perfect mate to Frankenstein, but she also initially rejected him, though in the comics there was no relationship between her and Victor in their backstory. Her skin was not initially green in the comics, though it was later changed to it. Her personality is colder and meaner in the show version, but she's not exactly nice in the comics. Like Frankenstein, she also does work for Shade, which means she's willing to do unsavory things sometimes to get the job done. The main difference between these versions is her relationship with Frankenstein, which is more professional and even intimate later on, some elements of her personality, and the fact that the comic version has 4 frickin' arms. I'm surprised they cut this out since it's a pretty distinct part of her design, but hopefully she can get them grafted on sometime in the future. At 12, we move up to Betty Bates. Elizabeth Bates, in the show, it was Weasel's defense attorney. Betty Bates, Lady at Law, is a very long-running Golden Age lawyer character. I assume they just grabbed the name from a list of lawyers and called it a day, but I'm still impressed to see someone like this show up on here. She was originally published by Quality Comics, which is kinda a part of DC Comics nowadays. Copyrights and trademarks are a whole complicated situation I'm not getting into here. And I'm also not spreading the falsehood that DC straight up owns all the characters from Quality. If you want to see an incredibly nerdy and very boring video about all that, let me know below. Otherwise, let's just move on. Next up at 11, we have Egg Fu, another of the non-human villains seen in Belle Reve. Egg Fu was originally an agent of communist China in the 60s. He was later redesigned as a horrifying monster scientist from Apocalypse, going instead by Chang Zhu. This version seems to mostly take inspiration from the latter. He's much smaller than he's usually portrayed, but I can't nitpick too much because he's had many different looks and sizes throughout his many incubation cycles in the comics. Now, entering the top 10 with Crimson Centipede, another inmate seen in the cells of Belle Reve. Originally, he was a creature created by Ares to cause chaos and fight Wonder Woman. His appearance in the show is literally straight from the comics. The original comics, not the boring-ass redesign from later. I'm sure if they ever revisit this character, which I doubt, we'll learn his origin is different and he'll fall far down on the list. But until then, we'll just assume it's somewhat similar and keep his absolutely wonderful design here in the top 10. At 9, we've got Chemo. Chemo in the comics was a large plastic vessel that a scientist would pour all the chemicals from his failed experiments into. Eventually, a chain reaction started within them that brought the entity to life, and it went on a rampage. In the show, he was another background prisoner in Belle Reve. This version of Chemo is much smaller than normal, but he is able to adjust his size due to the growth chemical that was poured into him. There's also no reason for us to assume his origin is any different. And since he doesn't say anything yet, we're safe to currently assume he's just a big mindless thing like in the comics. Now, why the hell does Chemo rate higher than Egg Fu or Crimson Centipede when they all look right and say nothing? Well, both those villains originally fought Wonder Woman. We don't currently know her place in this universe or if she's even come to man's world yet. Chemo fought the Middlemen, and we've seen their schematics already, implying that there may have been the ones who beat Chemo and put him in here. It's not much, but it's enough to get him a little bit higher. And the only reason he's not even higher still is that he's shown with a lunch, which makes no sense for the character since he doesn't eat food. At 8, we've got Animal Vegetable Mineral Man. Animal Vegetable Mineral Man was seen as an inmate in Belle Reve as well. He has the ability to turn his body into any animal, vegetable, or mineral. Now he looks like he stepped straight out of the comics. But so have the last few. Why is he a little bit higher? For Chemo, it's mostly the size changes, and the idea of him just being incarcerated normally in prison is just laughable. And Animal Vegetable Mineral Man's design has remained relatively the same into the modern day in comics. That makes him a teensy bit more correct as an adaptation than Crimson Centipede, who, in the current continuity, has been changed into looking totally different. This is the smallest of technicalities, but it's why he's ranked a little higher, even if they're all basically tied. At 7, we have Kahless. Like a lot of the background villains shown in Belle Reve, Kahless' design is pretty spot on. In the comics, Kahless was an ancient mummy who fought Dr. Fate. Later on, he, or another mummy with the same name, serve as the medic on a modern version of the Creature Commandos. At the end of the show, we see he's now part of the team, just like the comic version. For now, he's done nothing to contradict what very little is known about him from the comics, but that could easily change next season. At 6, we move on to Rupert Thorne. In the show, Rupert Thorne was a criminal lord who funded Dr. Phosphorus' studies in exchange for his research. In the comics, he is a criminal, but most of his crimes were as a corrupt politician. However, in Batman the Animated Series, Thorne was portrayed as a crime lord, and it appears that's where this version is being inspired from. Adaptations inspired by other adaptations are where things can get really confusing on this kind of list. Besides that, the main difference is that Batman stopped Phosphorus from killing Thorne in the comics, and nothing in this version explicitly states he isn't a politician, so who knows. And now, into the top 5 most well-adapted characters, we have G.I. Robot. Comic and show versions of G.I. Robot were both created to fight in World War II. In the comics, there were at least 4 G.I. robots during the war. The first 3 sacrificed themselves to save other people. The 4th survives well into the modern day due to various convoluted circumstances. And we even have evidence that this is true within the show based on the 2 on G.I. Robot's helmet, implying that this version is Jake 2, and there very well may have been a few ones before that did not survive. The main differences are the comic versions have a lot less personality and, passion for their work, and their face designs and colors are different from each other, though both versions do wear an army uniform. However, their origins are the same, and the comic version did work with the original Creature Commandos, so unlike most of the members on this team, he actually makes sense to be here. Like the modern comics, he exists in the modern day, and though he's a robot, he does form bonds with the humans he fights with. Now at 4, we've got Doc Magnus. Doc Magnus is a scientist who was able to unlock the personalities inside metals with his invention, the Responsometer, and created the crime-fighting Metal Men. In the show, he looks virtually exactly like the comic book counterpart, down to the distinct jacket and pipe. He also has schematics for the Metal Men and is one of the only people in this time period who talk to G.I. Robot like he's a person and not a thing, showing his connection with robotic beings. Really, the only difference is that he's in the 60s instead of the modern day. Now into the top 3 with Amanda Waller. Amanda Waller was already one of the few characters adapted quite well in the DCEU, and from lines of dialogue we can assume she carries over at least a similar version of the continuity she had in there as well. Like previously, Waller is a tough-as-nails, intense, and ruthless woman who cares about nothing except working in the best interests of the United States of America, no matter the cost. The only real difference to her character is her daughter being different than the comics and her size being a bit smaller than she's usually portrayed, though even that fluctuates in comics. Most of these little changes are offset by her power in the universe as well as how damn scary she can be. And now at number 2 we have Clayface. We don't know which version of Clayface this is, so there's no point going too deep into his lore, even though different versions act differently and would affect his rating. But for now, he looks almost exactly like most modern comic portrayals do, and he's got the same powers as shape change and disguise himself. Now, at first I was going to rate him lower because of how goofy and unprofessional he acted as McPherson, but then I realized he was supposed to act suspicious to trick Waller into thinking McPherson had been taken over sooner than she could, so he gets those points back. He's portrayed as incredibly powerful and dangerous as well. Supposedly, he's getting a movie for God knows what reason, so we'll see how they choose to mess him up in there so he can plummet down on this list. But until then, he gets to be up in the top 3. And now, at the number 1 most well-adapted character in Creature Commandos, and therefore the entire current DCU, we have Sergeant Rock. Well, actually, Sergeant Rock and Easy Company. In the comics, Sergeant Rock is a legendary soldier of World War II who led Easy Company and fought in every major theater of battle in the war. We don't learn enough about each individual member of Easy to individually rank them, but from what we see, they're mostly comic accurate besides a few little changes. Little Sure Shot even got to keep his feathers, which is something adaptations usually ditch immediately. One of the other major changes is Four Eyes' skin color, but there was still a black member of Easy Company named Jackie Johnson, who we do not see in this group. And then, of course, as mentioned before, the addition of Bogman. For Sergeant Rock himself, he leads Easy Company in some of the worst action of World War II. He's got his iconic helmet, his rugged open shirt, his grizzled attitude, and his manly features, and he even smokes. He's fought alongside nearly every other World War II character, including the Creature Commandos and G.I. Robot. Pretty much any flashback to the war will feature a cameo by Rock and Easy Company, so it's good to show they knew to use him here and not kill him off. We've seen a lot of changes across this list, but Sergeant Rock seems to have been adapted with at least a little knowledge and some respect for the character's place of importance within the continuity of the DC universe. So there we have it. And what have we learned, kids? Well, while some characters are complete disregards of their source material, quite a few of them are actually taking more cues than I'd expect from their comic book roots. But what do you think this list tells us about the future DCU? Do you think characters will be adapted with at least a small amount of respect for the source material, or do you think they're just going to not care at all and they'll just do whatever random crap they want? Do you think they'll pick and choose which characters they'll adapt well based on how important they are, or do you think it's not going to matter at all? Any nitpicks you have about changes that I did not cover here? And most importantly, which character in Creature Commandos did you like or hate the most in the show? And were they adapted well, or were they changed massively? If you like this kind of breakdown from somebody who actually has read a damn some comic in their life, click that subscribe button to hear something about some topic at some point in the future. And one more thing. There are plenty of other monster inmates in the background who I'm going to be honest and say I don't know who the hell they are. And looking around the internet, I ain't seen a lot of good theories either. My only guess are perhaps Great White Shark or maybe Smiling Skull for this guy, though they're not monsters. And maybe a version of Praying Mantis for her, though I think that's a reach. If you consider yourself a DC expert and think you can identify any of these background villains, let me know in the comments below and I'll give them a rating. Otherwise, the world may never know.